on this show, I kind of expect us to talk about the philosophical question that you sort of posed on Facebook, and I'll get into the backstory of that here in just a second.
Yeah.
But with you being an audio guy and us having worked together on film sets, I fully expect this thing to go in really a multitude of different directions. I expect us to talk about audio gear, which we've already done a little bit of. I expect us to talk about storytelling, maybe get into how you got into podcasting, just a whole lot of different stuff. I'll definitely have you tell us about what you were talking about the Oki show stuff.
Yeah.
So, and we'll just see. I'm expecting that we'll probably chat for about an hour, and if it goes longer than that, then we can either break it up into multiple episodes, or we can just put a big chunk and hunk of something out there, and people who are listening can come back to.
You want to do a Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson style conversation that lasts for like 5 hours?
Oh my gosh, I actually love those. I really do.
Did you listen to the most recent one with Rogan and Peterson? Because it's really
I know that that Rogan was saying that it's like Peterson at the best that Peterson's ever been.
Yeah. I would have,
which is really good. I've been listening to JP's. See, this is why I love podcasts. I was never expecting us to go down the rabbit hole of Jordan Peterson.
All day.
I know that I've been listening to his lecture series on Genesis, which is
I need to listen to that so bad.
It is actually really cool. We spend the first 3 hours of you spend the first 3 hours of the lecture, like the entire first lecture. So it's like 2.5 hours of him lecturing, and then like an hour of questions, or 30 minutes of questions or something.
So cool.
And the very first episode, you get 4 verses into Genesis. That's it. Like,
yeah.
The whole.
Well, but that's the thing is, like, he can do that. Like, that's, and like,
it's naturally, it's also because it's also the introduction, and he's trying to explain what he's trying to accomplish with it. And he's very clear that in his intro, he's like, look, I'm not claiming that I know everything about this. Yeah. Not even close. What I am trying to claim here is that I have ideas, and I feel like the best way to figure out if your ideas hold any water is to try and talk about them. So this is my way of talking about my ideas and seeing which ones hold water. I'm thinking through my own thought process to try and see if it's actually worth anything. And by you being here and listening with me, and then also asking your questions at the end of each one of these lectures, maybe we can take this journey together, and maybe you'll ask something that will bring up a new kind of perspective that I didn't previously think about. And I think that that's something that I was not expecting, and it's something that I'm actually hoping that we get to sort of mirror in this episode, right? And so, most people know that I call this. This is for your benefit. I sent you some of the podcasts and stuff like that, but I call myself the multidimensional nerd. That's actually a play on an old joke that my mom told.
I love it.
So I was talking to her about stories, and then we somehow got on to Jordan Peterson, and then we somehow got onto politics, because we always end up on politics.
Yeah.
And she just stopped and looked at me. She's like, "You're like a multidimensional nerd."
Yes, that's high praise.
Yes,
that is high praise, my friend.
That is literally what I am. And so that stuck. I immediately rebranded my podcast to the Multidimensional Nerd.
Multidimensional Nerd.
So that's what was
multidimensions. I mean, that's hot right now. It's a good buzzword.
Yeah. So the especially with all the crap that Marvel's doing, like quantum.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Man, like, so this idea that that's what we're doing with this episode is that I've been doing lots of movie reviews and story breakdowns, because I'm a story guy. But now I'm talking to an audio guy.
Yeah.
And through the course of talking to an audio guy, we're going to go down sociology and philosophy. So
there you go. Well, yeah. And that's one of the greatest things about this job is that, I think sound is a little unique to a lot of the other departments. Maybe camera kind of falls within the same workflow. But with sound, especially in Oklahoma, where I'm from, we do every type of job possible. Like, we're not just working on movies, we're also working on I work on a ton of documentaries and true crime. And, you're also doing commercial work and corporate work and, super boring stuff. But the fact that we can bounce back and forth between, pretty hardcore reality documentaries to the opposite of that, which is film, like actual movies where you're playing make-believe, it's pretty unique. And you get to get very close with different types of people. And I think that if you're doing your job well, then, it's always a priority whenever you're, because sound guys, we have to be in close proximity to talent, because the fact that we're putting mics on people and it's got to go under their clothes. So, you're up in their grill. So having interpersonal relationships is very, very important. And so, like, that's one of my favorite things about this job, is the fact that I get to work with so many dynamic people and people from all different walks of life. And you really, when you're doing that, if you are navigating through your career with preconceived notions about other people and, biases and that kind of stuff, you're going to have kind of a miserable time, because it's not,
and you're going to get corrected real fast.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, this is an extreme example, but, and this isn't my story. This is a sound guy friend of mine, but he was wiring up this guy, and the guy opened up his shirt, and this guy had a big old swastika all over his chest. And what in any other scenario are you like, encountering something like that? And then you have to soldier on, and you have to, say, keep face, and you have to, if you are putting the talent in any kind of a moment of uncomfortability or anything like that, well, your interview goes sour. So it's our jobs to maintain that. So in that instance, like, he just kind of like, oh, and he, wired him up, and then, continued.
See, I'm way too loquacious. I would have immediately looked at it and said, there's a story behind that, and I want to know it.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, and I'm the same way of, like, I don't think I'd ever, like, outright ask, but, like, my ears perk up of, like, I want to know who this guy is, and what's the story there. And oftentimes the story is wildly different than you would ever expect.
Correct. Because anytime that I see something like that, and this goes up to back to my upbringing, is I go immediately back to something akin to American History X, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is somebody that probably got wrapped up into something and then got wizened up, and then now it's there forever.
Right.
And they have a choice. They have to either choose to keep it covered, or they can use it as some type of testimony, right? And whether that's a religious testimony or not, it doesn't matter. Ultimately it is a testimony of some type, to whether it's a growth in intellect or whether it's a growth in spirit, or both.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I say, like, I want that story. I see the guy, like, I'm not gonna, like, while I'm trying to mic him up and we got 10 minutes to get the set, I'm not gonna, like,
yeah. Well, and you have a choice. You have two options there. You can communicate with that person with openness and willingness to listen, which is what we as sound guys are paid to do, or you can try to own them, and you can try to shut them down and make them feel wrong without finding out the story. And oftentimes when you actually sit and listen to the actual story, now sometimes, now keep in mind, we're talking about a guy with a swastika on his chest. Not all of those types, in my experience, not all those types of people are full of regret, but there is still a story there.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
Your access to that story is dependent on the way that you behave in those moments. So you can either shut down something, or you can learn something.
Yep. And I think that that's actually a great segue into how this came along. So you and I worked together and really hit it off on Birthright. So it was a feature film, which, like, both sides of that story can go back forever, on yours and on mine, as to how we both ended up on that show. I think that that's a lot of people. Like, there were a lot of people that were on that show that were just like, if it weren't for God, I would not be here, right? And that doesn't mean that, like, there's a lot, like, not saying that it was like their lives had been threatened or anything like that, but to say like they were at a point in their life where it was like there was no way that they could have made that choice, that it was like someone made a choice because of something that they felt, or that someone thought of them at the right time when they were down and out. And so,
I mean, that was definitely me. I mean, because I don't know if I told you this, but like prior to going on to that movie, my boom operator and I had been working on a series for 3 straight months where our job was to be a part of an investigative crew that hunted down child predators. That's what we did for 3 months. As the sound guy, I had the joy, and my boom operator, she was actually an associate producer on there doing story. So she was also listening in on the cans. So our job was to sit there and listen to people groom who they believed to be children. And by the end of that, my boom operator and I were both pretty, I mean, like it had definitely taken its toll on both of us. And like, I was honestly ready to just pack it up and just say, I'm done. Can you hear me?
You somehow.
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me now? Hello? Check.
Yeah, I got you on my computer. I think my AirPods cut out for a second. Let me get them back.
Ah, they're there.
All of your stuff. But it'll be really funny because I'll actually get to go back and look forward to something in post-production, because I missed like the back half of that.
Oh no. Okay.
All I heard was that she was listening on the cans, but I sort of get the idea. You guys had the joy of listening to some pretty graphic stuff.
Some of the most, and I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this for at least 12 years, and it was easily the most graphic stuff that I've ever had to listen to the point where I'd sometimes just take the headphones off, because like I just, and I've worked on shows with murderers and serial killers and all sorts of horrific people. But man, when you've got an entire quarter of a year of just that, like, man, like I was about to throw in the towel with film completely.
Yeah, that's the part that I remember you telling me about. You didn't tell me why you were ready to throw in the towel, but you did tell me that you were ready to throw in the towel. Now, it's a much, like you said before, it's a much different story than what I was expecting. I expected to hear something like I was down on my luck, I wasn't getting a bunch of work.
I wasn't getting any work, and then the work that I did get, like, it was just kind of these crappy short films.
Yeah, no,
and like it was some heavy stuff, man, and like that opportunity to work on Birthright came about as we were wrapping that show up, and I took the job immediately, but like then the question came of like, who am I gonna hire for boom operator? And I've got a pretty short list of people that I go with, but I felt compelled to bring on Tomasa, who was the associate producer on that other show, and she'd been wanting to get more into sound, and she'd been asking for work and stuff. So I asked her, like, hey, first of all, are you doing okay? And she was kind of, yeah, ish. Like, well, why don't you come on this movie with me? We're going to go to Georgia and we're going to go to Arizona. It's a faith-based movie. If anything, the script is fantastic. So, like, let's just use this as kind of like a rehabilitation project.
I've been doing a ton of writing since then, and I've used Birthright as my gold standard. Like, if I don't achieve, specifically from a perspective of ease of reading, right? It was one of the easiest scripts to read. There was exactly what I needed in there to get the visual that I needed.
Yeah.
But there was not a wasted word. Not a wasted word.
It was just such a well-written script. It was so tight and just dense. And like the character development, the character arcs, I mean, everything about it. It might be the best movie I've ever worked on. And
it was
almost my Oh, come on, I'm closing in on my 50th feature.
And I'm seeing it. So I see all of these. So that movie was funded by Sony Affirm. For those that don't know, which means that there's a sort of a tier list of Sony, and there's big Sony, then there's peak, and then there's Sony Affirm, as far as like each of these different subsects of big Sony deal with different levels of budgets. And so it's the same people whenever you see the ads for the George Foreman movie that's getting ready to come out. Same big honchos that are putting up the cash for the George Foreman story put up the cash for Birthright. If Birthright does not get the same, if not better, marketing treatment than the George Foreman movie is getting right now, I'm going to be up in arms.
Oh, 100%.
I'm going to be absolutely up in arms, because I'm seeing some of the shots, I'm seeing some of the dialogue, even just in the trailer for the George Foreman movie. And I'm like, okay, I bet you that's interesting. That ain't got nothing on the movie we just made. Yeah. The movie we just made is on just a different level. It really looks fantastic.
So good, man. I mean, like it's got all the classic Western tropes. I mean, goodness, we shot on so many different classic Western locations and whatnot.
Yeah, we were there at Mezcal where they shot Tombstone, man. That's like that. You tell people that.
I'm wearing the hoodie for those who can't see, a Mezcal movie set.
That story from you, and I'll share my story about Birthright some other time. The audience can kind of get into that, but it was on that set that we developed this relationship that we have now. It was a lot of banter, very similar to what we're having right now whenever we were on set and when we were allowed to talk, because that's a thing on movie sets.
Yeah.
But
well, it's me who's shutting everybody up too. Sorry.
Yeah, and so that led us to having this thing where I saw just a sort of a. I'll let you explain your position. I won't spoil your position on this.
Okay.
But you made a Facebook post that had some sociological and psychological implications, and as I read it, I was like, that has some merit to it. And then the longer I thought about it, the more I was like, I disagree.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you disagree, because, meaty conversations, that's what it's all about. If we were both,
the moment where like I made my post and I was like, if it never if he doesn't get back to me or anything, it's whatever. But I just want to, I'm going to put in my 2 cents.
Yeah.
And then you shot back to me. And the moment that you shot back to me, the more there was like, there's a conversation here and it doesn't need to be had in a comment thread. So I
agree. I agree.
I reached out to you.
It's a dangerous game whenever I post anything like thoughtful on any social media platform.
Yep. And that's where this is where I love podcasting, man, because this is the opportunity where you have those conversations that people have, like the Facebook wars and the comment threads and everything like that, and no one's actually getting around to anyone else's points. All you're worried about is how are you going to respond. You're not actually engaged in listening. You read it, sure, but the whole time that you read it, you're reading it because you've already if the first sentence or two doesn't agree with what you have to say, you're probably just starting to formulate in your brain as you're reading it how you're going to rebut. And so that can go back and forth. It's also extremely time consuming and well, I think I don't have time to type on Facebook all day.
Yeah. Well, and the factor that always gets me somewhat riled up on any kind of social media platform is that there's also an audience there. So, whenever, and this goes for anybody, like whenever you respond something, like somebody posts something and you respond kind of in a snarky way, well, the world can see that.
Right.
And
and so now it becomes a game of tit for tat.
Exactly. Now it becomes about who can own each other, and like that's, I'm too old for that crap now.
So, with that being the backstory, we're now 15 minutes into the podcast.
Yeah.
I haven't talked about the thing. With that being the backstory, go ahead and explain the initial post that you made. And we'll kick off the conversation there. So it's sort of like he said, I said, he said, and then we'll go.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm super duper fascinated with like psychology and sociology and stuff like that. and human nature. So I journal. So whenever I have I'll randomly have a kind of a spitballing thought that I'll throw out on Facebook or whatever. But I'll write about it a little more indefinitely, like kind of in my journal here. Let me see if I can find. Oh, okay. So this was on January 31st. So I had a random thought last night, and it truly was random. What if human beings are specifically designed to not get along with everyone? Our most basic instincts are to breed and spread. So over time, a human community gets dense enough that we eventually spread to another area. Well, what causes a primitive human to leave their home for somewhere else? Well, it could be that social dissonance is a factor in our natural need to spread. You get sick of the majority, so you build a small community somewhere else. So maybe we're designed to not get along as a basic prerequisite to the spread of the species. But in today's world, we can't get away from those other people indefinitely. So our still primitive brains don't know what to do. We can't escape our enemies by spreading, so we fall into groups and tribes of like-minded people to counteract that broader social dissonance. You're protected because you're surrounded by, quote, your people. Now, I don't think that our divisions are truly based on anything other than common interest and worldview. And then I kind of expand on like what brings people together and then what draws people apart. So because like, and the reason why this has kind of been on my mind is because like we had this utopian idea that somehow everyone is going to tolerate each other all over the globe. Eventually, we're going to be able to get along with everybody. And I just don't think that that's possible. I don't think that we are designed to get along completely across the board. I think that we are designed to be different, designed to be unique in our thinking. We find our groups of people that we have common interests with, like me and you. And, otherwise, the people that you're having a dissonant relationship with, you keep them at arm's length.
So this is where I begin to disagree with you. I don't think that people leave somewhere typically because of the presence of something. I think that they leave a place for another place typically because of a lack of something being one place and something being somewhere else.
Right.
And this permeates all the way down. I also think that this is true. We've seen this on a macro level, and we've seen this on a mid-grade level, and we see it on a micro level. If you want to go back in time to this idea, people didn't leave big metropolitan areas because there were too many people. It was for a lack of opportunity to do something. And so they decided to go somewhere where there was an abundance of opportunity. This is true if it's Europe coming here, right? So the Puritans, there was a lack of religious freedom. And so they wanted to come to a place where there was an abundance of religious freedom. Why? Because there was no governing body here yet. And so you see the same thing with people that go west. People traveled west for the gold rush, not because they were leaving something that was here. There was too much of something here, but for the opportunity of something else there, right? There was a presence. It's difficult to find gold in the Appalachians. It's really easy to find gold in the Rockies. Let's go to the Rockies. Because it's this idea of prosperity. It's the same thing that you see in families today, I think. You see you see children and young adults, they leave home to go to college. Why? Because the education that's at home no longer is sufficient for what they desire, right? Whether that's, even if there is a college that's local to them, okay, well then let's take that analogy and let's play that out for a second. And now I find myself talking like Jordan Peterson. So that's what happens. If I listen to people for too long, this is an actor's crutch. If I listen to someone for too long, if I listen to someone for too long, I never lose myself, but I definitely pick up aspects of others. If I'm around my family, I pick up my old Southern accent. If I listen to too much JP, I pick up not his accent, but his cadence, how he thinks and how he talks, right?
He has a very thoughtful, like he's always in the middle of a very deep, and he's trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's like the cogs are turning in his head.
Yeah, you can see the wheels turning in his head.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch that. So back to what I was saying, though, let's say that there is so I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. University of North Carolina at Charlotte is a very good university that is there, and yet a ton of people that I went to school with chose to not go to UNCC and stay and live with their parents while they went to college. They instead, like I did, chose to go somewhere else. Why? In that case, it actually has nothing to do with the quality of education that's being presented. For me, in my case, there was a football opportunity. For some people, they want to get away from their parents because they want to be hooligans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I didn't do a fair amount of that as well, but it is the presence of freedom, typically in some capacity or perceived prosperity, that leads people to leave a certain area. The other reason why I don't think that, let me take it on a macro level, right? So we've talked about the ancient side of things, not ancient, but the old school side of things, right? From the 1600s and 1700s. And I'm sure that sort of idea permeates even back farther in history. We've talked about that on a sort of a micro familial level. You can even see this whenever people leave college and they decide to move to a different city that isn't where their family is at. Typically, people just got jobs in the cities where their families were for the longest time, and now our ease of access for travel has sort of eliminated any barriers that were there. And so if there's a better opportunity in California, well, I know if I can take that opportunity in California and make enough money, I can fly and see my family whenever I want to. It doesn't really matter. And technology, like your point is, because of the internet, we can't really escape anyone, but that also means that we aren't afraid to go anywhere, right? Yeah. Like sure, we can't get away, but that also means that I can go to Europe and I can still, or my brother right now is in Europe, but he's stationed in Germany, and yet I can pick up the phone anytime I want to, and so long as I got my timestamps right, I can call him and be like, hey man, what's going on? How are you been? How are the kids? It's especially important for me and my nieces. Okay, on a macro level, let's look at what happened during COVID in the state of California.
Yes.
You had this is what has been dubbed by many people, like Ben Shapiro and some other people, as the Great Sort, right? You have starting in the 70s, you had this massive influx to LA, back whenever you could buy land for some of the cheapest land that you could get around, and yet there were more opportunities both on a corporate scale and on an entertainment scale than there was anywhere else. Fast forward 40 years, and now you have homes that you can buy anywhere else in the country for $300,000, $400,000 that are $2, $3, $4 million.
Yep.
And they don't have any land. They're all stacked right on top of each other. You can't move anywhere on the highways because it's just chock full of everything, to the point where, sure, the money for the film industry is still in LA. All the major producers and all the agents and everybody are still there because they're the ones that can afford to live there. Yeah. But all the people that work, all the crew, all the places that things are being filmed at are not in LA anymore. They're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah. They're in Oklahoma. They're in Atlanta, Georgia. They're starting to come down to the Tampa, Miami area. They're going back to New York. They're going back to New York little by little. Michigan, for some godforsaken reason, has a budding film industry. I don't understand.
Yeah, that is weird.
So you have industries on a macro level leaving a place. You have people on a macro level leaving a place in droves, and it's not because there's not something there. There's an abundance of opportunity that is still in LA. However, there is especially through COVID, there was a lack of freedoms, individual freedoms. That's why Texas and Florida got the majority of the California natives moving there, because those are the two places that didn't have all of those restrictions. And so it was a flight away from, it was less a flight away from something bad, in my opinion. And this is because I'm a hopeless optimist. But it's actually like, yes, things were bad, but if things are bad and there's nowhere better, okay, you stay where you're at. You see this in America all the time. Things get bad whether you're on the left or on the right of the political aisle during
And you try to soldier on through it.
During Trump's presidency, the people on the left thought it was the absolute worst period of time in history to be an American, and yet so many of them, threatened to leave. Well, I'm leaving. I'm giving up my citizenship, and right. How many of them actually did it? Almost none. Why? Because even though their perception of the United States was bad, the ultimate truth is that there was nowhere else that's better.
Yeah.
Right. And so if California is bad, but there's nowhere else that's better, nobody has a reason to move.
Mm-hmm.
It's the presence of an alternative that is objectively better, or at least subjectively better, right?
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Like, I think so. What we're talking about is, why do people migrate? And so the point that I made earlier is that, like, if you take away society, or take away civilization, because society and civilization are different. Mm-hmm. Take away civilization, and you just whittle us down to, like, even kind of pull away like the spirit aspect, just look at us as organisms. What do? Like, within our most basic instincts are to multiply, right? So to have kids. Like,
right. And this goes back to Genesis. We were talking a little bit about Genesis earlier, and JP, and that's the idea of be fruitful and multiply and take dominion upon the earth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so as you multiply, you have to spread out. You have to have more space. So the question that we're talking about is, why does someone leave their community for a different community? Now, there's two reasons for that. One is the thing that draws them away, which is opportunity or freedom.
Right.
But what's the thing that pushes them away? Because, like, you can, in modern times, now we see that all the time of, like, there's this really great opportunity over there, but I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave my family. I don't want to leave my community here because I'm too deeply rooted in there. But then you have somebody who hates their community. Well, that thing that keeps them, nailed there is no longer there. It's not drawing them, to stay put. So now the thing that's drawing them away is a lot stronger, because that thing that keeps them in place is no longer there, because they don't have that social connection. Like, I don't know if it's an actual term or not. I just called it social dissonance because I think that's
I still think it's the presence of something else. So let's say, let's boil this down and make it simple, right? Let's say you have a family structure, right? So you have a wife and 3 kids, and 2 of the kids grew up and they identify with the moral and ethical principles of their parents. It doesn't matter what the moral and ethical principles of their parents are. Let's just, for the sake of the opposite side of the argument, than what I typically argue for. Let's say that you have a very, by modern definition, liberal family, right? So I'm not talking about like classical liberalism here. I'm talking about left-leaning,
progressive left,
progressive left. And their parents are 100% okay with ideas of transgenderism, homosexuality, and
abortion on demand.
Sure, we'll throw those 3 out there, right? So, but let's say and typically it's the opposite, right? Like, or so often you hear about the opposite story, about the kid that sort of leans more liberal and goes running away from their family. So that's
out of here, Mom, man.
Yeah, right. And so let's say that the 3rd child, in their rebellion, because it's almost always out of an act of rebellion from how they're being raised, instead of jiving with that progressive liberalism or that progressive liberal ideology, this person finds a Bible and they really key into the Bible, and they see like chapters in Leviticus that talks about how it is shameful for a man to have relations with a man in the same way that he would with a woman, right? Like as plain as day. You can take your ideas about homosexuality out of it and everything else. Leviticus is extremely on the nose about, like, it is
pretty black and white.
It is shameful to do this.
Yeah.
Right? And in the meantime, the the parents and all these other things are attending a bunch of these activist functions, and they don't. And the kid with the Bible, right, that sort of has this other morality, this morality that's guided by something different, that disagrees with that, says no. Well, okay, and says no, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't think that's right, but they're stuck, right? Because they still belong to that family until they turn 16, 17, 18, old enough to get a job and strike out on their own. And there is a church that's willing to take them in, or a family at a local church that they've been able to attend one way or the other. And that kid goes away. Once again, in this example, it is the presence of the church that gives the kid a place to go, right? Like it is a positive attraction, even though the negative makes it easier for them to cut ties. There has to be a positive attraction in order for them to leave.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting point. Because I mean, like when you look, well, I think church attendance is a good kind of litmus test for what we're talking about. Like, why does somebody leave their church? You know, this is their spiritual body. This is their, close tied community. This is their community. So why would somebody leave a church or move to a different church or something like that? Because like when people leave church, and I can speak from my own personal experience of when you leave a spiritual body, well, sometimes it's not because there is an opportunity for a better church. Sometimes, like specifically in my case, it's because, the church is moving in a direction away from the values that you hold dear, right? And so you cut ties with them because of that social dissonance. Like we're not on the same page anymore here. Like,
right.
You're like, I believe A, B, and C, and that's what we all originally believed. And now you're shifting away from that. So I got to go.
That's interesting. That is a very interesting point, because that is arguably the only time when it comes to church attendance and specifically Christianity, a wholesale acceptance of Christianity itself, there are some people that would prefer nothing.
Yeah. No church at all.
And maybe it could be, if I take it in the way that I've been arguing everything else, that from a subjective perspective, they believe that the presence, because most of the time, let me caveat this, most of the time that I find people leaving the church or walking away from Christianity, it is because it was too hard, or they didn't like all the rules, or they didn't like the hypocrisy, right? The hypocrisy is its own thing, because why would you go to are you going to go to a gym and see a bunch of fat people, and because there's a bunch of fat people in the gym, decide you're not going to that gym anymore? Like, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the hypocrisy argument. If you're using hypocrisy as your litmus test, find a different litmus test.
Welcome to humanity.
Broken.
Yeah.
We all
welcome to the whole point of Christ.
Let's take that one away. So then you have the other two, right? You have either you don't like all of the rules that are placed on you, and it's just and therefore you desire this perspective of freedom.
Yeah.
Which we can address that in a second. So pin that, right? So the idea of rules and freedom versus it's too hard to obey the rules, it's easier to be of the world. And from that one, we'll address that one much quicker, is that I feel like the church gets this wrong so easy and so often. That second one is that when you are baptized, when you accept Christ as your Savior, you are not promised that life is going to be easy, that you are no longer going to be persecuted, that you are going to escape depression, sickness, or death.
Yeah, people think that, like, why is my life still a complete wreck? Well,
by the acceptance of Christ, what you have done is you have secured eternity, which is impossible for us mortals to fathom until we get there.
Yeah.
Period, bar none. Otherwise, everything else in your mortal life gets harder, not easier. And we fail miserably at imparting that on new Christians. We do. We're bad at it. Why? Because it's not a good sales.
Yeah, we're bad at marketing.
It doesn't, like, you can't have elevation worship, right? That puts butts in seats in 100 different locations across the world whenever you're telling people, hey, by the way, this sucks.
Yeah, it's gonna get real bad.
Now back to the other idea that the rules create this stuffy sort of claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. There's an old idea that Viktor Frankl had, actually, if I'm not mistaken. He's the guy super popular for the idea of logotherapy, which from a psychology perspective is this idea that you can fix almost every major psychological issue without drugs by helping people find meaning in their life. You can cure drug addiction by helping people find meaning in their life. The issue with it, that it hasn't gotten more success in today, and why there's really only one institution out in Texas that teaches it anymore, is because it actually cures people. And this is a guy, and so it's like, can have this.
Well, yeah, then they'll be out of a patient.
Exactly. That's the whole point, right? So,
right. Get them healthy, but not so healthy that they're not going to pay us anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You need therapy. You should keep coming and telling me all of your problems so that I can help you do nothing about it, but make you feel better because you talked about it.
Yeah.
Versus, here, let me help you find meaning in your life after your child died or after your wife died, so that you're not so horribly and totally depressed that you take your own life. Right? Like,
yeah.
If you're weighing the scales, back to my point, said that yes, the Statue of Liberty is a great thing on the East Coast, but it should be offset by a statue of responsibility on the West Coast. Because liberty 100%. Without responsibility means nothing.
Yep. 100%.
There is no virtue in liberty without the responsibility, because if I am liberated to the point where there are no laws, if I am liberated to the point where there are no consequences, if I'm liberated to the point where I can do whatever I please, right? My fist can hit your face and there'll be zero repercussions. Why shouldn't I have my fist hit your face?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? It is my responsibility that holds my liberty in check and gives it meaning. Right? I have a responsibility to you as a human being not to run my fist into your face, even if I have the liberty to do so.
Right.
And I think it's a fantastic idea, ultimately. And when you relate to why people leave the church and go to nothing instead of having a community around them, is because people often value and prioritize, trick themselves into believing that nothing, that full-on liberty with no guiding principle, no repercussions for your actions, that you can go out as a 13-year-old individual with an ideology and mutilate your body because that's what the ideology tells you is okay to do.
Yeah.
That
why shouldn't you? Because
and then you see,
because this is freedom.
Exactly. And then you see people that have done that and that have faced the repercussions of it, right? Realizing that there is a responsibility, there's an element of consequence or responsibility that you cannot escape, no matter how much you disenfranchise yourself from the idea of repercussion.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and I think one of the major societal problems, I think there are two major societal problems that we're facing right now in the U.S. And I think the first one is that we lack purpose. And the second is that we lack responsibility. And when you strip away purpose, you have no purpose. Well, you can fall into nihilism very, very quickly, which leads to lack of responsibility. Well, none of this matters. Nothing's new under the sun. What's the point? So I should be able to do whatever. I should do what I feel is best for me, which is a very narcissistic way to think.
Yeah. Yep. And even beyond that, let's go.
It's funny though, like just to add a little tag, because this kind of just came to me of like, it's narcissism masquerading as individualism.
Right. This is correct.
Like, you know, so many people make the decisions that they make because they think they're being individualistic, when really at its root, I think it's because you have no purpose. I think you have set yourself up in such a way that you have no purpose. So the void that's left behind, and I believe that's a God-shaped void, when you pull that away, well, you're going to start pointing your identity into different things that fill that void. That void has to be filled somehow. It has to be filled somehow. Because otherwise, I mean, when you have no purpose, and when you continue to have no purpose whatsoever, what is the reason for being alive?
Correct. And that's where you go even farther away from narcissism and actually into Epicureanism, right?
It's
Like
self-deprecation and to self-hatred.
Yeah, well, to the point where it becomes a giant. The purpose of life becomes pleasure, right?
Yeah.
All of the it is the and so this is directly anti-biblical, right? Against what Jesus talked to us about, right? And that is that you become totally worldly. Like the when you masquerade, whenever you take something like individuality and you strip it of all of its purpose, right? Because the individual is meant to lend credence and power and sort of variability, right? So to the tribe, right? So let's go to tribalism. The tribe is made stronger by the individual, right? Without the individual, there is no tribe. The tribe is a collection of individuals, and it is the individuals of those individuals that strengthen the tribe as well. If you have too many of one thing, your tribe has weaknesses, which is why people need each other, because in many cases, we are only good at so many things. I'm not good at sound, right? I'm not going to run sound on a film set as well. I'm not saying that I can't do it, but like I'm not going to do it as well as if I have you on set. In the same way, someone could probably come to you with a story idea, and you'd be like, "Yeah, man, that's really cool," and not know where to take it.
Yeah.
Versus if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I got this really cool idea. I want to tell the story of Jacob wrestling with God as a Western. I got a feature film."
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a legitimate thing that we're working on. It's no longer a Western. It's actually like an Americana, like Hatfields and McCoys kind of story now.
I can dig it.
So that's one of our projects that's kind of behind the gate right now. So for anybody listening to this, you just got a sneak peek of one of the things I've been like making my fingers bleed over.
Yeah.
But it's because of strengths and weaknesses, and you see this on film sets. You see this in society as a whole. But it all starts with that idea of the individual, and individuality has a purpose, and that is to strengthen the tribe. And when you start taking this idea of individuality, you rip it of that purpose of strengthening the tribe, and instead you masquerade it. You take the veneer of individuality and you put it over top of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just let that cure the way that it has. Eventually, you end up in Epicureanism, which is this idea where the only purpose of life itself is your personal, individual pleasure, sexual pleasure, gluttonous pleasure, greed, like that. Like we're all Epicureans. We're all just running after the next dopamine, serotonin rush.
Yeah.
And that's sadly what you see with the internet. Back to what you were saying before, we can't escape that. We can't.
We can't get away from it.
It's almost impossible for us to detox from it. And in order for us to have careers now, it is necessary. It's not even like,
oh yeah,
it's not even I can get away. Yeah, it's not even I can get away from it if I want to. It's like if I want to work in storytelling, if I want to work in film specifically, I have to have these things. I have to be engaged. I have to be either accepting posts about this or posting about it myself all the time, somehow, some way, run a company while also developing. It is equal parts maddening, but can't. And because whenever you're put in all the time, and there's not as much growth as you would like there to be.
Yeah.
And this is like the dopamine.
Oh yeah, man. I'll tell you, like, yeah, just do a social media detox for like a solid month, and realize how much healthier you are mentally.
That was one of the things I struggled with. This is going to go into a really deep place, a really dark place. If you're young listeners, you should probably. It's not that I'm going to say anything graphic here per se. Want younger, probably like 9 or asking questions. Pausing and listening to yourself inside this, but a shout out. I'm not sure that anybody that if you listen to the kids around, there's something. Yeah, let's try this.
Sorry, I was trying to be subtle. Like, I don't want to cut you off.
No, you're okay. So did I fix it?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool. Every now and then, I guess I got to reset my iPod, my AirPods. The microphone's better on this than it is to my computer. So, and it's also easier whenever I can hear you through this.
Yeah,
I'm not getting a bunch of feedback, but
you're good.
And
I completely cut off your train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. This is going to go into a sort of a dark place. So if you're listening to this out loud and there are young viewers around, you might just want to wait, listen to it, put your headphones in or something like that. And then if you judge that it's a fine conversation for them, but parental advisory warning.
Yeah.
All right. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to keep going. When I shipped off to basic training, so I had gotten saved when I was about 22, and yet I was still struggling, right? We're all works in process. We're all sort of hypocritical in our own way. Even after I got saved, I was struggling really hardcore with a pornography addiction. And not only did going to basic training and not having access to my phone and therefore not having access to anything was one of the absolute best things for me. Getting away from the ease of access, just taking it away, man.
Yeah,
it was like not even like having to make the choice of not doing it, but like being in a position where I could not. There have been times in my life where I wish that I could go back to boot camp, but instead of being in boot camp, I wish that I could have a boot camp like schedule and do nothing but film work and writing.
Yeah.
Boy, no cell phone, dude. No cell phone. And I'm on a schedule. Somebody else is telling me where to go, when to go, what to do while I'm there.
Yep.
But if all of it was specifically directed towards film, right? And I didn't have to think about anything else in my life besides wake up, work out because it's healthy, and then go do film stuff.
Yeah.
There is no telling how successful or how much I could get done or how much I could get made. Like none. There's no idea.
Well, because there's no distractions, and that's the thing. Oh, I'm sorry. You finish.
No. You're okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, like, I keep thinking about humanity, like, well before technology took over and everything, because, like, you have to keep in mind, we've only had, like, as far as the internet goes, we've only had this technology for like what, 30 years, maybe. This is all still in the long timeline of humanity. We're still in a tiny fraction of humanity, of our entire history, which is why I think it hilarious that, like, out of all the millennia that we've been around, only recently have we become woke. Have we figured it out?
Oh man, see, I don't
only in the last 10 years have we've cracked the code, people. Against all humanity's evils, we've figured it out. And that is to do what? Shame everybody? I don't know.
Well, here's the sad part is that you see over the arc of history, you see several societies get to the point where they think that they figured it out like we have. Mm-hmm. The Greeks did it. The Romans did it specifically.
Yeah. The Egyptians, the Persians.
Yeah. But specifically, let's talk about the Greeks and the Romans, because I love antiquity.
Yeah.
The Greeks reached a point in their society where there were the two sort of preeminent like roles, right? Well, the like jobs per se were to be poets / playwrights, because many of them did both.
Yeah.
Or be a philosopher. And even out of those three things, most people did all three if they were in them, because the way that you showed your proclivity for philosophy was through the plays that you would write. You would take your ideas and you would find a way to enact them for people, and then they would have these grand competitions. And then and then young boys, right? The other people in society would they so revered these people and their ability to think that they would send their sons to go and study under them, and that's how they made their living. Is that they would charge money for all of this. Yeah. This is so evident in Plato's Symposium. If you ever get a chance to go and read it, it is incredibly evident that this is the case. And through the course of that, they created this extremely decadent society to the point where it collapsed on itself. They became obsessed with thought specifically, and homosexuality and these other things, right? And I mean that specifically through the pederasty, which was one of the things that was lightly and loosely still going on during the time of Christ, which is it's a whole different tangent to go down.
Yeah.
But that's graphic. So I'm going to avoid talking.
Yeah.
Pederasty.
You keep it PG.
But yeah. So if you want to learn more about that, I recommend that you read up about it. It was a huge part. Reading. Yeah. That's Spencer Clavin, Heretics podcast. If you go back to the early days of his podcast, in the first 10 episodes or so, he did an episode on Plato's Symposium, and it is a very, very good episode. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll plug his podcast there, because it's one of the places that I learned about such a thing. But you see the rise and fall of this, and so the same thing happened in Rome. Do I want to go there? Do I want to go there? Okay.
You're in too deep.
No, I'll go there. So one of the things that I'll say is that even though Rome committed many of these same sort of atrocities, became infatuated with homosexuality and all these other things right before they collapsed, one of the other things, and arguably the greatest harm that has ever been done to Christians and Christianity as a faith, period, bar none, was when Constantine made Christianity the religion of the state. Did the most harm out of anything else that has happened in Christianity ever, period.
Right.
Was Constantine doing that, because what that did is it added an incentive structure. Everybody else who's listening to me is like, I can't believe this guy. I can hear all the mumbling.
I know, because it's a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, it also helped, it spread Christianity across the world.
Like, what happened? Like, we would not have had the sins of Christianity today that we have had, both out of the Catholic Church, schism, the Crusades. Arguably, none of that would have happened without Constantine making Christianity the state-sponsored religion. And the reason why this was bad is because it added an incentive structure. I'm not just saying it was bad because it opened up Christianity to too many. I don't care about the elitism aspect of it. What I care about is it incentivized people that did not actually believe mainly high-standing oligarchs and people in the Senate and stuff like that were beholden to the old gods and the old pantheon. It incentivized them to convert, right? These are the same people that are obsessed with sexual immorality. These are the same people that are obsessed, that are still owning slaves and all of these things. That don't give two flying fadoodles about. Yeah.
Sorry, your mic just started feeding back pretty hardcore. Check, 1, 2. I wonder if it's it sounds like a linking issue. We keep having technical glitches, like right whenever you're having like the most meatiest thought.
Talks to me, Goose.
Okay, I can hear you again.
Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. I just abandoned the AirPods because it was being stupid.
Yeah, it sounds like the syncing was like getting wonky or something.
Yeah. So, but the general idea that I'm trying to get at here is that by incentivizing people to become Christian for reasons other than actually agreeing with the principles in which Christ spoke on, right, and taught, did irreparable damage to the Christian faith over the course of history, right? Millions, if not billions, of people have died in the name of Christianity now because, and directly linked to, the choice of a man to make state-sponsored religion or to make religion state-sponsored.
Right.
Right.
But it's interesting because in a way that also assisted in the spread of the faith, like as migration continued to happen. I mean, like that's the same reason that the Puritans left England, was because of the Church of England, that they kind of put a hard line down.
I would be willing to make the argument that starting in the 3rd century, so 200 AD on, if not earlier, but I'd be willing to take good money that most of the major issues and conflicts between cultures and most of the cultural bloodshed, I'm not talking about resource bloodshed, I'm not talking about anything, I'm talking about specifically cultural bloodshed, can be tied back to state-sponsored religion.
Yeah, I'd buy that. Yeah, I would definitely.
And that's me taking a wild guess, not having a bunch of numbers in front of me or anything like
that. Right, yeah.
Based on what I know about history.
Right.
Even between,
because you're having like people are trying, they're fleeing oppression.
Well, even that, or that if it wasn't directly caused, right? If it's not causality, it's at least not impeded by, assisted by state-sponsored religion. Because even the wars between the crowns in Europe was somehow linked to this idea that they were ordained by God, right? They were right. We were doing the same thing that Pharaoh did. We were just using Christ instead of a false god to do it, which is arguably even worse, right? If you're going to claim that a god decided to put you on the throne, I would almost rather do it with a false god than a real god, because if I piss off a real god, then
well, and I think that's what the 10 Commandments meant by "Don't take the Lord's name in vain." It wasn't,
exactly what he meant.
Don't you cuss now. No, I think it was more like, I believe that God told me to kill all the firstborns of this particular group of people that I don't like. It was God that told me to do it. It was not me. You cannot place the blame on me. What
And now I make a note to hire Brian for voice acting.
Yeah. I just imagine every maniacal bad guy actually has that voice. Where do you see? I knew declared that I am a tyrant.
I would totally cast that as like the wizened old man. It's like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. It's like his grandfather.
Charlie, I found the golden ticket.
That absolutely wins. On that note, man, it's been an hour and 5 minutes.
Oh man, I know. I want to keep going.
Well, let's do it again sometime, right?
Like, yeah, absolutely.
It's for me. It's starting to get around 10 o'clock. I'm I've got people that live with me, so I don't want to keep them up too much. This has been a blast. This has been a great conversation. You and I will brainstorm some stuff on the back end, and we'll see if we can come up with another idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I love having conversations like this. I think philosophical conversation and debate is super important, especially right now because of the kind of throwing back to the very beginning of the conversation, the social dissonance that we do have going on right now. I think the way that we can counteract that is by having conversations and finding common ground. You and I have plenty of common ground to go around.
Yeah. So oddly enough, whenever I first started podcasting, I never intended to do the multidimensional nerd. This show I never intended to do. I just wanted, like, the entire reason why I wanted to start podcasts was because I wanted to have conversations. I wanted to revive the art of conversation and argument. Argument not in the way of us being angry at each other, but argument in the traditional sense, right? In the classical sense of you and I having a disagreement and going tit for tat, trying to sway each other to our point of view. When I was a freshman in college, I actually had the book in there. When I was a freshman in college, we were required to read a book called Thank You for Arguing. It completely changed my perspective on what an argument was, and I fell in love with it at that point. I was like, that was one of the first seeds that was planted in me that like maybe want to potentially be some type of public figure to do this, because I just want to have conversations with people. And you're absolutely right. I completely agree that the art of conversation is dead. People want their 30-second TikTok clip of them owning someone, and that's it.
Yep.
And yet we see with JRE and the popularity that the number one most viewed and listened to podcast in the world is a guy who just wants to have conversations with everyone and do shrooms.
I know, right?
Right. He is arguably the most open-minded, literally the most open-minded human being on this planet.
Yeah.
Who is willing to have a conversation with anyone.
Yeah.
And
that's to kind of wrap up my original hypothesis, which was that, social dissonance is one of the factors in, people migrating and people moving. That's not to say that that is a good thing, to just to give up and to move to a different place, or, to cut ties and that kind of thing. I think that, diversity of thought is the most important diversity that we can possibly have, because that's when you have the most rich culture. But in order to have that rich culture, you cannot shut people down. You cannot tell them, you can't say that because I, as a whatever, have a more important viewpoint than you. And I think if we can soldier our way past all of that, boy, we're going to have a great society eventually.
Yeah, we are a blade in the forge fire. We're as a country, we enjoyed a period of relative peace. I say that relative loosely.
Yeah.
How many wars our country is known to be in, and I think that has been a unpleasant distraction from real problems that we have, because ultimately we're a very young country. And I think that
we're so young. I mean, like, listeners, we're not even like we're barely 250 years old as a country.
Yep.
That is a young country.
Senate. So the Senate in Rome did not fall to the empire till it was 450 years old.
Isn't that wild? And then it all came crashing down like that.
Yeah. And then it had about 200 years roughly worth of emperors, and then they just got raided by everyone. Which at the end of the day, like we say, it came crashing down, and yet we still had
globally, yeah,
right. Like ultimately, it didn't come crashing down. Constantine, back to the earlier point, made Christianity the ultimate religion. The papacy was established. He moved the capital to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and the power structure became varied, but all the people remained the same. It's not like they got conquered by anybody. It just sort of like divided amongst themselves. So the Empire of Rome went right and said like, we're not playing well nice together anymore. And a less optimistic look about our country might be that we're in a place like that. Maybe we're at a place where we have just a very different value system. It was John Adams that wrote to one of the soldiers on the front lines and talked about how the Constitution is made for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. If there's a subsect of people, there's a large subsect of people in our country right now that want to have nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with the founders' moral and ethical principles. And I don't want to say that that's okay, because from a sort of a global perspective, it's not. However, at the same time, so long as you're not impeding on my ability to adhere to those things, maybe a separation between the people that want that and the people that don't is a good thing. Maybe we've been too big for too long.
I mean, I agree. I would not want to see the country become multiple countries, but I can see how it could happen, and I can see how, in a way, it could be a good thing, because, California is not Florida and vice versa.
Yep.
Oklahoma is not New York, much as they wish it was. And that's the thing, is like, I think at the end of the day, this hypothesis about, dissonance creating spread and people moving around, I think at the end of the day, I don't think that God designed us in such a way that we were meant to get along with everybody. But I do think that he designed us in a way that we can find bridges to at least coexist.
This is correct.
We can do that. We can do that. That is within our means. That is one of the gifts that God gave us, is to be able to see across aisles and think for ourselves.
Coexistence requires a wall, not a handshake. Yep. Right? Like that is,
and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Like we have this notion that like there should be, everybody should be all up in each other's space, and there should not be, this and that, which is funny because simultaneously they'll divide themselves more and more into tiny subsections. It's a very convoluted mindset that does not make sense to me.
What I see happening more often than not is, as a country, we're reverting back to a more primitive version of tribalism, while trying to make sense of that by using technology that tribes should never and never did have any kind of access to.
Yep.
And so,
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I would say that we still have pretty primitive brains. Like, the reason why you get car sick whenever you're driving and you start getting motion sickness, your body thinks that it's being poisoned. That's legitimately why you get car sick. Our brains are still catching up to all this tech. And cars have been around since, 1910? And we're still, and our bodies, our biology is still catching up to all this crap. All the technology
faster than our bodies can adjust to.
We can't handle it.
Yeah, and the last thing that I'll say, and this is something that I want to relate back to story, right? I'm the multidimensional nerd, but the thing that I do more than anything else is I analyze story structure, and back to the general conversation where you're talking about dissonance. I think that when you look at stories, and the stories that compel us, the stories that actually pull on our heartstrings, that we view on the screen or in a book that we see as true, that the things that occur in that story that we identify with, how the plot is moved forward, is through desire, not aversion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that whenever if I was going to make a final point for myself and for my side of this thing, it is that desire is what drives a human being, because that's why we find desire so compelling in story versus aversion. Aversion might be an immediate catalyst, but it's a very short-term thing. Aversion doesn't stick with you the way that desire does. There's something rooted in us about desire, and that I could go into that whole thing. Like that leads a completely different brain track.
Right? Yeah. No, I like that though.
Maybe that'll be.
And I think that you very well may be right. And that's the thing. Like these are all just pontifications and theories and that kind of thing. We don't know anything for facts because we're not actual sociologists or anything like that. But
I don't think the actual sociologists know any of this crap. Dude, the fact that you got a piece of paper from some college that says that, hey, you did 2 years of useless work so that you could do 2 years of somewhat meaningful work, and that means somehow that you're qualified to study this thing and write a thesis on this thing, and then after 10 years you think that you've got it figured out. Look, if both Marcus Aurelius and Socrates got to, and the Apostle Paul for that matter, got to a point where they all said something to the effect of, if there's one thing that I know, it is that I know nothing.
Yep.
If those three dudes say that, I am
don't know crap.
I am 100% comfortable saying that not only do I not know crap, but they don't know crap either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, like, none of us know what we don't know. So at the end of the day, we're all just trying our best, you know?
And that is where I will go back to Paul, who says, and he says this in relation to faith, but I think that it is true of all things in our life, regardless if they have direct faith-based implications or not. And that is, test all things and keep that which is true. If there is any story advice that I could give any aspiring writer out there, it would be, if you have an idea, test it.
Yep.
Take all of your ideas and test them. Write them down. They don't got to be full length. Make a bullet list. Get an outline. Do a treatment. Something. But get it on paper and give it to somebody, or tell someone about it. And if they like it, if they think that it is true, then keep it and keep going with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be refined, and it's probably going to refine you as you go about that. So that's my last two.
No, I love it. I think you're dead on, man. Dude, this has been a lot of fun.
This is so cool. Yeah. All right. So we'll put together something else. Everybody out there, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this conversation. This is the type of thing that I want to do more of, as well as continue to give you movie breakdowns and all this other stuff. But Ryan, thank you so much for coming on to the Multidimensional Nerd, dude.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
And for all you guys at home, thanks for coming out, nerding out with us. All right, mate. So, dude, that was really cool.
That was awesome.